Welcome back. In the last video, we left you with a daily challenge to think about why you think becoming an innovation leader for your team or for your business unit is important. The reason we asked you this question is because it's important to do it for the right reasons, and not simply because we are reacting to market pressures, but rather because we want to bring systematic, long-lasting change into the organization such that we empower and build a community of innovators that are empowered to use tools like we're going to give you, methodologies like the ones we're going to give you, in their pursuit for new innovations for your team. But tools, practices, and methodologies are 100% useless unless we start with the right mindset and we adopt the right mindset. The best way to do that is by going through the material that you were given in the video to watch for this one, and that is causation and effectuation. And we will go through each of those concepts in quite a lot of detail. But ultimately, what we are trying to do is to get you to adopt an effectual way of working with innovations. Let me start by talking about causation. Causation logic means that you start with a set of goals, or maybe one particular goal to be specific. And what you're trying to do is to reach that goal. So for example, if you want to start, let's say, a Mexican restaurant, and that is the goal, you then walk yourself backwards to evaluate what is it that I need to start a Mexican restaurant. Well, I need a Mexican chef, I need Mexican food ingredients, I might need some dishware, I might need a venue, etc., etc., etc. And then the challenge becomes in gathering those resources, whether you buy them or use them or lease them or what have you. If we were to take the same concept using effectual logic, you would begin by looking at what you already have yourself or you have access to. So for example, I would then start by saying, I like Mexican food and I actually can cook Mexican food rather well. What can I do with that? What are some of the end goals that I can achieve with my ability to cook good Mexican food? Could I open up a restaurant? Maybe that's one option. Could I maybe bottle up my salsa and start selling bottled salsa? Could I offer catering? Could I sell to other restaurants? Could I industrialize Mexican food production? The end goal is not known, but what is known is what I have and what I have access to that leads to different goals. If you think about causation versus effectuation, it's almost like turning the first on its head, where rather than starting with the goal and aligning resources and buying resources and garnering resources to get to that one goal, you put that resources and you take them as granted and you take them as what you control, and instead let the goal be what varies. Causation logic is what you might be familiar with in large organizations. And this is something that should be the way in which you work in large organizations. Why? Because it brings the hierarchy, the structure, the processes that are needed in order to manage thousands and thousands of people and a multitude of processes. Otherwise, it would be quite like anarchy. On the other hand, if you're trying something innovative, if you're exploring new ways of doing things, products, services, what have you, causation logic actually restricts the innovativeness and your ability to explore new goals. Why? Because rather than having a set destination, effectuation allows you to explore with the resources you might have in order to achieve different goals, like the example that we gave with the restaurant. This effectual logic is not to say that it is good and causation logic is bad. They are rather different, and they have contexts. If you think about the maturity of any organization, most businesses begin being startups, and then they eventually grow and become large corporates. When they start out, usually they start working with an effectual logic. They start exploring ideas until they scale them and become a large organization. But when they become a large organization, because of structure, hierarchy, and efficiency, they adopt a more of a causal logic and set of practices. But when that organization needs to be, again, innovative and creative, it needs to go back to the cycle of effectuation. And this is where a lot of corporates, because of tradition and history of using causation logic, have a little bit of a difficult time becoming more and more effectual like they used to be when they were startups. This is the mindset that we need to adopt in large corporates in order for us to explore new innovations. So let's explore effectuation a little bit more in depth. Effectuation has 5 principles. We are going to cover each of these 5. First, bird in hand. Second, affordable loss. Third, the crazy quilt. Fourth, the lemonade concept. And last, pilot in the plane. Let's dig a little bit deeper into each of these. First of all, the bird in hand. It's better to have a bird in the hand than 2 in the tree. Why is that? Because effectual innovators or companies that use effectual logic rather than having a fixed goal to which they are driving resources, aligning processes, even signing up schedules and budgets, they actually focus on understanding what is possible with the existing amount of resources that they have or those that they have access to through partners or people in their network. In large organizations using causal logic, there's an analysis before action. And the reason why, it's because you have a history to analyze. You have a track record that can serve as information on which you conduct analysis and then predict the future. In effectual logic, the process happens in action in order to gather knowledge. Action before analysis. And in doing action before analysis, the purpose of doing this is to reduce risk and to reduce the number of unknowns so that you are grounded much more in reality, such that the innovation you do explore is not based on some historical fact that is not yet proven in the future. Remember, you are doing something new and innovative, and history may or may not influence that. Rather than basing yourself on that type of analysis, innovators using effectual logic base themselves on grounded reality, action before analysis. The next concept is probably the most powerful in effectuation. It's the concept of affordable loss. Affordable loss means that a team, an individual, or an organization who is looking to explore new innovations will only invest what it can afford to lose in that particular exploration. So what it means is, rather than doing the causal typical experiment where a particular goal is being achieved, a budget is associated with it, and a team is dedicated to the completion of that goal, instead of doing that, what we are going to do is start multiple small incremental experiments with resources that we can afford to lose, affordable loss. Each one of these experiments informs us, teaches us about the impact our innovation may or may not have on our intended customers or users. With that knowledge, we build solutions that are much more closely aligned with the value they create for their customers. What this means in practice is, by running a small set of experiments, you are minimizing the waste that goes into the resources allocated to that, and you are mitigating risk as best as possible, only putting in the resources that you can afford to lose. The next concept is the crazy quilt. As some of you might know, in the US, a quilt is made up of leftover pieces of cloth from clothing and old types of maybe curtains and other things. And what the concept refers to is that rather than making commitments to an existing marketplace with structure, with competitors, with suppliers and buyers, you are piecing together, just like you would a quilt, commitments and people who are willing to participate in the development or exploration of the idea you are trying to pursue. In this case, a new innovation being a product, service, or a process. Okay? Rather than, say, using 5 forces that you might be familiar with, Porter's 5 forces, and evaluating the existing competitive market and how competitive it is, the power of suppliers, power of buyers, and so on and so forth, you are piecing together potentially a new market. And so therefore, effectual logic is much more adequate for this exploration than, say, Porter's five forces that presume there's an existing marketplace to which you are going. The next concept is that of the lemonade. If life throws lemons at you, make lemonade. How are you going to manage contingencies? In the causation logic, which is common to the corporate world, contingencies are best avoided through careful planning and accurate predictions, where in the effectuation world that is common to innovators and entrepreneurs, contingencies are actual opportunities. There's a big difference in ideology there, and more importantly, in mindset. So rather than seeing contingencies as a real problem, they're actually opportunities to learn and adapt to going forward. The next concept is piloting the plane. If you think about this from an effectual point of view, the way that we think about a future is not that we try to predict it, but rather control it. If you think about this from the corporate's perspective or causation logic, to the point that we can predict the future, we are better able to control it. Now, keep in mind what we said initially about the end goal. In causation logic, you are aiming for one endpoint, one particular goal. So it makes sense to predict and try to control that future based on your analysis and your best case predictions. But what if you don't know what the end goal is going to be? All the predictions in the world don't really matter because where you thought you might end up might be a totally different place. So rather than trying to predict the future, what we are going to do is trying to control the future, such that to the extent that we can control the future, we don't need to predict it. Let me give you an actual illustration of a company that was born out of effectuation. Yankee Candle. You might be familiar with this company. Yankee Candle was started in the 1960s by 17-year-old Mike Kittredge. He didn't have enough money to buy his mother a present for that Christmas, so he melted some crayons to make her a candle. A neighbor ran into Mike and said, "What do you got there?" Mike sold his first candle to his neighbor. Another neighbor came up and bought another candle from Mike, and Yankee Candle was born. As more and more neighbors started asking Mike for candles, he started producing them in larger and larger quantities. The company itself was founded from help with Donald McGalver and Susan Obremski, who were high school friends with Kittredge. McGalver helped fund the startup business with earnings from his part-time job. Later, candle production grew considerably after Obremski's father devised a heated room, which enabled the cost-saving liquid wax deliveries at the first factory site. Obremski's invention of a turntable allowed production to double rather soon, while at the same time it decreased the need for more labor hours in production of these candles. In 1975, he managed the first Yankee Candle shop located in South Hadley, Michigan. The company would go on to grow to more than $845 million in annual revenues. Now think about that for a second. A company that grew out of someone's need to make a Christmas present for his mom because he didn't have enough money to get her one. Out of what he knew and what he could do, he created something that was needed or wanted. He then grew the company through the help of his high school friends and their parents to the point of $845 million in revenues a year, and eventually the company was acquired by a private equity firm for more than $1.75 billion. So talk about growing a company in an effectual way, using the resources you had at your disposal, using the networks of people that you had to build that quilt, and having an unprecedented growth that nobody could see at the very beginning. Let me leave you with the daily challenge. Think of one thing that you could do at your place of work during the next day or week that demonstrates you've adopted an effectual mindset. One thing you could do, for example, is to think of your team's competitive advantages, maybe your business units or your organization's competitive advantages. And think about what you do with those advantages and resources today, and think to see if you can do a new product, maybe do a new segment, maybe go to a new market, new geography. That could be a good start, but I leave it up to you.